morning, Carol.
I think you know it's always a pleasure to be in your company.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
So today you'll find out it's also an honor to be in your company. I think in preparation for this conversation, I actually read your book a second time.
Just a second?
Just a second time. But I'm glad it was the second time.
Mm-hmm.
And there was just so much more to it than the first time. Mm-hmm. So I know I'll be reading it the third time. But before we talk about your book, which is actually part of the reason we're here,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to let everyone who is watching this morning know who you are.
Okay. Well, good morning, viewers. My name is Lesley-Gail Atkinson, and I am the editor of the earliest Inhabitants. I'm actually an archaeologist with the Jamaican National Heritage Trust, and I head their research division. Also, I've been an enthusiast, lover of the Tainos from when I was a teenager, and for the past 20 years, they have been my life, love, and obsession. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation this morning.
Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really good to be here.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, we're here because the UWI Press is honoring Black History Month by focusing on a number of authors, promoting Jamaican authors, Caribbean authors, other authors, and really trying to bring to light some of the really excellent literature that has come out of this this publishing house. Your book is one of many, but a very important one. In your book, you talk about the fact that the literature, that the information, the data that has been gathered from many of the research activities that have happened here has not been put together and put out to the international, the national community.
Sure.
Is this your contribution to that?
Yes, but it was it came about pretty haphazardly. It actually started through a conversation with Bill Keegan, who is an archaeologist with the University of Florida and the Florida Museum of Natural History. And whilst here, he was lamenting about very little work being done here in Jamaica, and this is a similar situation like in Cuba and Haiti. And I expressed that it's not really a matter of no work being done, but it is not disseminated as well as we should. We tend to keep things in-house, particularly at the Heritage Trust. And this was a way of showing Bill that it's kind of funny because he later became my supervisor for my PhD. But as you can see, we had a very colorful discussion, and this is the end result of that.
Well, there you go, Bill. See, we got something. Lesley-Gail, I want to ask you a question, and this popped into my head the very first time I looked at this book.
Mm-hmm.
The first reading didn't happen at one sitting, of course. It happened over a period of time. But the first thing that struck me with this book was prehistory.
Yes.
Now, I'm kind of in a loop here because I thought there was nothing before history.
Well, there's a long period before history. I'm an archaeologist, and in archaeology, man's evolution started from the creation of the first tools, the development of language, the formations of cultures and societies and governance. And this history is millions of years old. Not because it doesn't have historical documents to reveal it to us now doesn't mean that it didn't exist and it shouldn't be acknowledged. And in the Caribbean, our history is pretty late. We tend to think of it mostly with the arrival of the Spanish, but it started thousands of years prior to that, even 5,000 or more in cases like in Cuba and in Hispaniola or the Jamaica, unfortunately. Well, I don't even know if it's unfortunately. It's just I don't think we've found the data to prove that our history is as old as the other islands because our colonization is a little later.
So then the distinction being made is one of documented history and undocumented history.
No, it's more of the materials that you use, right? Because, the historian uses people's writings and historical sources. The archaeologist looks at artifacts like what we have here on the table, which are germane, everyday artifacts in terms of what they used for their day-to-day existence. But these things also provide an indicator of, what their skill sets were, what their worldview were, all the things about that were important to their society. And these things have to be studied. And we retrieve a lot of this through excavations, surveys, and interestingly, we find a lot of things through exploration of caves, especially whole pieces and wooden pieces and so forth.
Yes. The Earliest Inhabitants, The Dynamics of the Jamaican Taino, edited by Lesley-Gail Atkinson.
Long name, eh?
It's a beautiful name, and it's a powerful name for a powerful person.
Thank you.
The Earliest Inhabitants aims to promote Jamaican Tainian archaeology and highlight the diverse research conducted on the island's prehistoric sites and artifacts.
Well, it was only a scratching of the surface because there's so much more that we wanted to do, but we wanted to start. I believed from my days at the Institute of Jamaica, that's in the late 90s when I worked on refurbishing the White Man Museum, which sadly is now defunct. I realized that there's a lot of information out there and a lot of misconceptions, and especially with the view that Jamaican archaeology and prehistory is like a black hole, there's nothing there. And also about our understandings of who the Taino are. We tend to think of them as some lost civilization that died out with the Europeans, and a lot of their legacies are still surviving in us. A lot of the places that we choose to settle are also an indication of their settlement patterns, focusing on areas where there were strong watershed that they could access riverine and marine resources, or agricultural styles, our language, even simple things like our food habits and our preference for certain types of fish and bami and all those things. And these things are very much alive, but they're not recognized as much. And that is why I think UA Press, in honoring them through Black History Month, is very, very important, because we tend to only make reference to them on May 5th on Indigenous Taino Day. And, they are very much a part of our lives now. And they should not just be shelved as images on our coat of arms, but the first Jamaicans.
Yes, and interestingly enough, they greeted the Africans who came, did they not?
Yes, they
and
did.
The Africans, in a sense, is what, that African presence, that African entry into Jamaica is what makes Jamaica a black country today.
Yes, and that is an excellent point, because a lot of people don't realize that with the arrival of the Europeans, the Tainos were the first enslaved peoples in the region. And it was because of their enslavement and the harsh treatments that they underwent during the encomienda system that it gave rise to the introduction of the Africans as the next set of enslaved people. We see most of our ancestry through our African features and characteristics, but slavery did not start alone with Africans. It was more probably horrific. Well, I guess it's debatable because I'm not there. I wasn't there at the time, so I don't really know. The Taino population practically died out as a result of these harsh treatments.
Right. And you say probably not more horrific, but for each group,
it's horrific.
No matter what happens, it is horrific.
Yes,
is it not?
Yes, it is. And it's degrading. It is degrading. And part of the problems in degrading them is also the dehumanization of them no longer being individuals and persons with their own identity, but becoming subjects. Prior to the 1980s, Africans were not recognized as people studied in particularly in Jamaica. They were just objects associated with the plantation. Excavations like at Drax Hall and at Orangeville in Portland was the first time that they arose as contributors to the success of these plantations and as persons themselves were being recognized. And this is the same problem with the Taino people. For many years, for centuries, they were just objects of curiosities.
I want to backtrack a little bit. In your book, you talk a little bit about the Ostinoid.
Yes.
Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Ostinoid or Ostonians.
Or Estonians or Ostinoid people who were the ancestors of the Tainos.
Yes.
They came before the Tainos. How were they similar or different to the Taino people?
No, actually, it's the Ostinoids were the first people to basically be created in the Caribbean sphere. You understand? Because, the entry into the Caribbean had various indigenous groups from different parts, whether Central or South America, and establishing themselves in the various islands, as in Cuba and Hispaniola. But around 1,000 years ago, a culture developed from the various indigenous groups meeting here, archaic societies, early ceramics, and that group evolved into what we know as the ancestors of the Tainos, or Estonians. And they have different branches based on their different ceramic cultures and subsistence strategies. And the ones that occupied Jamaica were the earliest Estonian, which is what we call the redware group, because they had a bright red ceramics that had animal images and so forth. And they tend to settle primarily along the south coast with a few pocket sites. And then a later group, the Mayaks, which they believe were associated with peoples who came from Haiti, later colonized Ireland. No, there's a lot of challenges and mystery in terms of what exactly happened. You know, did one group displace the other? You know, did one group conquer the other? Did they assimilate and form what we know as a Taino society that Columbus encountered?
Right. Because the next question that's popping into my head is, why do we then regard the Tainos as the first Jamaicans?
Well, technically they're not, because the first colonizers is the Estonians.
Okay.
With the Estonians. But it's easier to just use the term Taino to encompass them and their forefathers in the Jamaican
Estonians
context.
as well.
Right.
Okay, so Tainos, therefore, a broader context.
Taino is the contact people. Because we don't know exactly. Remember, you can't always pinpoint when exactly a culture started. It's through thousands of years of growth and expansion and taking different ideas from different groups. But according to Caribbean archaeologists, what we consider the Taino culture evolved about like 1200 AD. So a lot of what we consider Taino is not really them, but it's really their ancestors.
Okay. Mm-hmm. But it's convenient, as you say, to put everything together in how we refer.
And also, as you know, we don't really know if they really called themselves Taino, because the ethnohistory accounts highlights that their names were associated with where they lived. Like you had the Boricans who lived in Puerto Rico, Locayo who lived in the Bahamian archipelago. And all this time we've been taught that Examaica, which interestingly there's no X in the Taino or Arawakan lexicon. So that is probably a Spanish corruption of probably what they call themselves. I mean, Columbus reference to Yame, so maybe Jamaica, Ka being the name for location. So the people of Jamaica.
Yes. And there is one reference in here to that name, Yamaye, as what could possibly have been the name.
The name, right. Mm-hmm.
That was later changed to
what we know.
And now has arrived at
Jamaica.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to touch back to your book a little bit, Lesley-Gail. You are technically the editor of this book, and it has a number of contributors.
Yes.
How did you decide on the contributors? Because I suspect that there must have been so many persons who had work that would have been eligible to be included. How did you, how did you focus on this in a way that says this one, this one, this one?
Well, what I did was I had certain themes that I wanted to look at. And as you see, the book is broken down into 4 themes. You have the first section, which is the assessment and excavation of Taino sites. So that would focus on what excavations that have been done. And based on my work with the JNHD, I was already privy to a number of the excavations because we have to monitor them, because JNHD is the regulatory agency for all archaeological digs on the island. So I was lucky to have met people like Bill and Philip Oswald Jones taught me here at the university and so forth. And Andrew Richard was a colleague of mine at the JNHD. And development and the impact of Taino, destruction of Taino sites by infrastructure and housing development is a big problem that we have to face with.
Right.
Then I've always been fascinated with how man exploits his natural resources, the flora and the fauna, and that is how the second section came about. And I wanted to include not just botanical, but also zoological analysis, and that is how Sylvia Scudder's work at Rodney's house and her comparative analysis with White Man and Bellevue, that is how that was included. Then, of course, in archaeology, what defines us is our data that we analyze, and ceramics tends to be, and stones tends to be the most popular items that we find. On special occasions, like at Avico, we found, wooden zemis in the cave there.
Yes.
But those are very rare, and those are really gem. And then I am a lover of art. My dream was to be an artist, and who to tell, maybe in the future that will happen. So in everything I do, I always find a way to incorporate art and symbolism in its work.
So to a large extent, this book reflects you.
I wasn't
Your
trying
interest.
to, but maybe my biases, yes.
Okay.
Maybe my biases.
You mentioned earlier about Taino sites and artifacts. And you have a beautiful map in your book on page 5, page 4 and 5 actually. And it shows, it's a map of Jamaica, of course, and it shows areas where excavation has happened.
Well, no, this map is sites that have been, that are mentioned in the text.
Sites that are mentioned in this text,
so
right?
So these people a geographic description of where they're located.
So they're not necessarily sites that have been excavated
not
as
all
yet.
of them, but they have been, most of them have, there been some sort of whether surveying, mapping, or a few of them have been excavated. But this is only 182 sites, and there are much more. There are hundreds more times.
What do you mean? Only 182? I was thinking, well, this is big.
Well, from my personal research, we have as much as 600 Taino sites, prehistoric sites on the island.
So, in other words, the statement that makes is, arguably, this is Taino land.
Well, it was always Taino land.
But then we have all of this thing that says, yes, it is true. Fantastic. I was really taking this map. I looked at it over and over. But then there's a fair distribution of sites right across the island.
Yes.
But it also depicts some areas where
I
am assuming that, yes, there are some gaps there. Is it that these areas, you've not looked into them?
I don't think that we've, because of, like, for example, we find very little sites in Portland. And, Portland is my favorite parish, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I find it odd that somebody would not want to settle there. Yes. But I think it's a matter that we have not recovered the evidence.
Because it is documented that there were Tainos.
There are a few. Yeah,
especially in the Rio Grande Valley, I've seen that documented that there were Tainos.
And Nannytown later on.
Exactly.
And even we have not really examined as much as we should the offshore, because remember, Jamaica is an archipelago. So there's a land, the mainland, and then there's some offshore caves and like Pedro Banks and so forth. And those are probably rich with Taino settlements. Carol?
Yes. Some of the papers I found to be so very fascinating here. But it's kind of difficult to focus on one because there's so many that are really giving you